Why did the Bruins suck this past year? Why did the Bruins miss the playoffs for the first time in 9 years? Why did they regress so heavily? How have they fallen from 2 years ago being the best regular season team in NHL history to being where they are now, a team that's picking inside the top 10 this year and probably should be thinking about doing the same thing for next year? How did we get here? I get this question all the time. I hear it. And mainly when looking at 2024-25, the answer I hear the most is, well, come on. They got hurt. Hampus Lindholm was out for most of the year. Elias Lindholm was battling something. Charlie McAvoy wasn't on your team for the last 2 months of the season. Well, they weren't in a playoff picture at the Four Nations break, which is when Charlie McAvoy got hurt, and they were farther out of the picture by the time the season ended, obviously. I hate that. I hate Bruins fans just saying, oh, well, that's the problem. They were just hurt. There's some analysts saying that too. Next year, when they get these guys back, they'll be just fine. Although they failed to mention that Hampus Lindholm didn't really have a good 23-24 season. Kind of took a step back. And Charlie McAvoy has not been the same player the last year and a half that he was the years before that, or that we projected him to be at this point in his career. That's not saying Charlie McAvoy's bad. I still really like him. But let's be honest with ourselves. Has he made the jump that you thought he was going to make by age 27 here, 28? Hasn't for me. I thought by this point he was going to be a Norris Trophy kind of guy. He was top 5 in the Norris voting back-to-back years in 2021 and 22. And his buddy, the guy he was compared to all the time, Adam Fox, goes out and wins one. And where's Charlie McAvoy? Good enough. Good enough. Number 1 defenseman. Not a number 1 defenseman on a Stanley Cup contender. And then lo and behold, there we are. So when people say it's just the injuries that got the Bruins to where they were in 2024-25, they didn't watch this team. It goes much deeper than that. You know why they weren't very good in 2024-25? You want the real reason? Part of it was because Jeremy Swayman brings a whole lot of drama to this locker room right before the season. Days before the season, he finally signs a contract. Remember the captain, Brad Marchand? Remember when he played for the Bruins? Yeah, he was saying, I don't talk about contract stuff in the media. We don't really do that around here. Clear, veiled shot at Jeremy Swayman. Guy doesn't have a preseason, goes in and has a career worst year when he's finally making some money. Sets the market and then sucks as a huge drop-off. Is genuinely one of the worst starting goalies in the entire NHL. So was it because they were injured? Or because the position that they value more than most teams in the league had a huge drop-off in 24-25? Or maybe, just maybe, it was because they couldn't put the puck in the net. Remember that? 29th in the league in goal scoring? 29th in power play percentage? Oh, but they were second in fights. So you want to tell me they didn't make the postseason because they were injured when they're sitting there in 29th place in goal scoring, in power play? Oh, yeah, I bet that's because they were injured. Because they had all these elite offensive players that were just injured this past year. It had nothing to do with the fact that this front office does not know how to replace any kind of talent that they had. Let's go back to the real reason. Looking back at the 23-24 team, which absolutely overachieved by finishing second in the division, by winning a playoff round, even though it was the Leafs, that was an overachievement in 2023-24. And you look at the guys that had career years that year. Charlie Coyle, 60 points. Where did that come from? 60 points on 25 goals. Completely out of nowhere. You thought, probably never going to get that again, and you didn't. Pavel Zacha, 59 points. He's down to 47 this year. Played for your team the whole season. Morgan Geekie is the only one that took a step up. But I look at the guys who aren't even here anymore. Oh, I'll mention Trent Frederick as well. He'll never, ever, ever have a 22-goal season again. Or excuse me, an 18-goal season, 40-point season. He's not going to do that. Not going to do that again after what we saw last year. But let's look at the guys who didn't make the trip from 23-24 to 24-25. Jake DeBrusk, Danton Heinen, James Van Riemsdyk, Kevin Shattenkirk. All guys that I think an average GM to above average GM in this league can replace the production for. Maybe everyone but DeBrusk. DeBrusk was 40 points. Danton Heinen, career journeyman, career year, 36 points. James Van Riemsdyk, 38 points. Kevin Shattenkirk, 24 points. Those were crucial depth guys on your team that were sometimes even healthy scratches. The Bruins didn't replace any of that. Any of it. Like, think of that. DeBrusk, Heinen, Van Riemsdyk. They combined for what? 38 plus 36 is 74 plus 40. That's 114 points that they just didn't replace. They replaced it with Elias Lindholm, who had 47, and fill in the blank. They replaced it with Matty Patra, with Johnny Beecher, with Justin Brazeau for half the season, with Marat Husnadinov. They didn't replace that production at all. Here's where I get really pissed off with Don Sweeney and all those people who are still defending Don Sweeney after all these years. It's okay if you're a good team taking a stance and saying, you know what, Jake DeBrusk, you can walk. We're not giving you a 7-year deal if you can't produce 50 points or more for us in any given season. I'm okay with that. But then you've got to replace him. And they didn't do it. And they didn't do it this offseason either. Which also leads us to the guys that they did bring in. Finally, for the first time in about 9 years, the last time they missed the playoffs before this year, Don Sweeney's got some money to work with in free agency. There's been 2 times in his tenure with the Bruins that he's really had enough money that he could cook out on the free agent market. You'll remember 2015, it was going into the 15-16 season. And it was Jimmy Hayes, David Backes, and Matt Bolesky. Zach Ronaldo, that piece of shit. Those are the guys that Don Sweeney went out and got that year. This time around, he's got money again. He's going to be bold. He's going to put his ball sack right out on the table, and he's going to let Jake DeBrusk walk. How does he respond? Elias Lindholm, 7-year deal for almost $8 million a year, and Nikita Zadorov on a 5-year deal. Nikita Zadorov, who's on team number, 6 or 7 of his career, as he just turns 30? Yeah, 5-year deal. Here's where it'll stick. Here's where he will really stick. This is like the mentality that Don Sweeney has that just doesn't add up. You know, here's where he'll be a real force for us. And I kind of like Zadorov. I hope he is a force for the Bruins in the future. But to say he had a good first year would be lying. Elias Lindholm, same thing. Everyone else saw the writing on the wall. Calgary saw it. In Calgary, Elias Lindholm played alongside Johnny Gaudreau and Matthew Tkachuk. And that's when he became a point-a-game player. And when those guys were gone, his numbers dipped. And Calgary was willing to trade him at the trade deadline. And then Vancouver, who got him, who just spent capital on him, was willing to let him walk. And Don Sweeney says, no, you know what? He's going to do well with us. We can't put 2 superstars next to him. We can put one, and he didn't even play well with him, and that's David Pastrnak. But we're going to be the ones that figure this out. Again, not the case. David Backes, all the way back 10 years ago, an icon with the Blues. He was the team captain. And nobody in the room thought, why are they letting him walk? He's kind of the face of their franchise. Why are they letting him walk? And why, when he's on the wrong side of 30, are we going to sign him to a 5-year deal and expect that to work out? That's where I get pissed off with Don Sweeney. He makes good trades sometimes at the trade deadline. I'll give him that. But he doesn't really draft well. He doesn't spend money well. He doesn't get good free agents on good deals. He doesn't fleece anybody ever. And I think he can't read the writing on the wall. And he doesn't replace production, man. Doesn't replace it. Again, if you want to let Torrey Krug go, fine. They didn't really replace him, but they had a good enough team at the time that it was okay. But then when you're not as good, when you're a team that just wins one playoff round, and you let a 40-point scorer go and you can't replace him, like that's a big time. That's really bad. That's a really bad look on a general manager. And it's I know I've been killing Don Sweeney for most of this summer, but I think most of you guys would agree with me on it. And I just hate, I keep seeing it pop up that, now that the Bruins are healthy, they'll be much better. I just don't see that vision. I wish I did. It would make me happier, but I don't see that vision. The reason why the Bruins didn't make the playoffs this year is because they have a front office with terrible asset management, and they didn't replace any of the fluke production that they got the year before. Looking back on it, should the 23-24 Bruins have even won a playoff series and finished second in the really good Atlantic Division? No, they shouldn't have. They overachieved. And they let a couple of Jags walk and a couple of nice players walk, and they couldn't replace it, which is amazing. Like, we're not talking about like Hall of Fame players here, okay? We're talking about Jake DeBrusk, Danton Heinen, Kevin Shattenkirk, James Van Riemsdyk, Matt Grzelcyk. Guys who in a vacuum, like, that's okay to let them go. But most teams let those guys go because they can bring somebody in. Like, how do you not replace those points? It should be pretty easy. You let all those guys go who you were paying nothing, right? I mean, we talk about the 114 points, right? Is that what I just laid out? Heinen, DeBrusk, JVR, Kevin Shattenkirk. You weren't paying those guys anything. They didn't even they didn't come close to making a combined $7.75 million in the 23-24 season when they gave you 114 points. And then you went out and spent that same money, $7.75 million, on this year for a guy who gave you a third of those points. It's like the opposite of Moneyball. It makes no sense. That's where I get lost with Don Sweeney. The people will say, this has to come every once in a while. We had it so good for so long. But the reason why it came to this was because they couldn't replace Jake DeBrusk. That's where you lose me. That's where you lose me. They knew the writing on the wall was coming for years, and no one was thinking they should have been a Stanley Cup contender last year. Nobody in their right mind was thinking that. But there's no reason, like with the outlook going into last offseason, that they should have been a worse team than Ottawa. In fact, they probably shouldn't have been a worse team than Montreal, who's going to blow them out of the water the next couple of seasons. So that's where you lose me. That is why the Bruins didn't make the playoffs this past year. It wasn't because Hampus Lindholm was hurt. It wasn't because Charlie McAvoy was hurt. It was because you had nobody who could put the puck in the goddamn net. Didn't go out and get anybody to do that. And you had to fire Sale because you did that to yourself. Now, here's where Cam can become positive here. How can they make the playoffs in 2025-26? It's tall order. As evidenced by the fact that I did a segment on the show yesterday about why they should tank for Gavin McKenna. Okay, it's a tall order. You need a lot to go right for the Bruins to make the postseason this year. First things first, you're in one of the toughest divisions in hockey. Okay, in order for the Bruins to make the playoffs this year, you have got to be better than either Ottawa, Montreal, or even Detroit. And I don't think the Bruins are on that plane right now. I really don't. I think the Bruins are much closer to the team that they ended the season with than the one that they had that were in a playoff spot in January last year. Like, they were horrible, god-awful after the trade deadline, after they cleaned house. That's the team that you're rolling in with. Plus Sean Corrali and Tanner Jeannot. Like, you're really not getting huge reinforcements here. Here's how they can get into the postseason, though. They would need a lot of things to go right. They would need Charlie McAvoy and Hampus Lindholm to come back and find their form that they were in 2 years ago, almost 3 seasons ago, in the 2022-23 season, when Hampus Lindholm probably should have been a Norris finalist, and Charlie McAvoy was not that far off, coming off 2 top 5 Norris Trophy finishes in 21 and 22. They need those guys to come back and hit the ground running right away. They need Charlie McAvoy to be something he hasn't been in a couple of years. They need him to look like the Charlie McAvoy that we saw in the Four Nations when he was the best player on the ice in that U.S.-Canada game, round 1. That's what they need from him. They need Hampus Lindholm to be a legit two-way top 15, 20 defenseman again, which he's only had for a glimpse of his career. They need Elias Lindholm to be at least a 60-point guy, which he hasn't really been outside of the couple of years where he was in the 75, 80-point range with 2 terrific wingers on either side of him. All-stars, future Hall of Famer, one of the great players of his generation, unfortunately cut down too soon in Johnny Gaudreau. You need him to be closer to that than he was to this. That's a big ask for Elias Lindholm. When he wasn't playing with those guys, you know what he's like? He's kind of like this Elias Lindholm. So you need that. You need Jeremy Swayman to get back to all-star form, and you need him to save some games for you. You need some Swayman points throughout this season, and you need somebody in the middle 6 to become a 25-goal scorer. Who is that? Matthew Poitras? Tanner Jeannot's never going to be that. Fraser Minton? Casey Middlestat? Pavel Zacha? I don't know that you have that guy. But if those things go right, and Ottawa kind of regresses to what they were the year before last, and Montreal has some growing pains, then maybe you got a shot. Maybe. But don't give me the excuse that the Bruins were injured. They were heading down this shit path, whether they were injured or not. And I'll be straight up with it. If Hampus Lindholm and Charlie McAvoy were on this team, I don't know that they would have made the playoffs anyway. I think they still had a humongous problem in goal scoring. So they're going to try to win a lot of games 2-1 this year, but I don't know how many times they're going to get to 2 goals. The other thing about it is if they did have those guys, they wouldn't have fire sailed at the trade deadline, which I think would have been worse for the Bruins in the long haul than what they actually did. So let me know what you think in the comments section below. What's the real reason why the Bruins did not make the playoffs in 2025? And can they make it in 2026? Let me know in the comments section below. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. We're bringing you Bruins content every single weekday, live on YouTube, and then available wherever you get your podcasts as well. Check out the other videos on YouTube, talking Bruins, talking everything else going on in the world of Boston sports. I'm your host, Cam Stewart. Zach Burke keeps us on the air 5 days a week.